I'm someone who enjoys getting to relax in video games. Sure, some tense moments to heighten the story or when facing a tough obstacle are welcome, but for the most part, that's not really my thing. Frostpunk 2 is definitely not one of the cozier games that I would say that I've played. And as I sat down to play the story mode last week, I was not sure what I was in for. Starting off with the tutorial, players are given access to a small valley complete with some resource plots, plenty of snow and ice, and a crashed train capable of generating heat. One of the first things your population discovers during the tutorial is the Captain's Legacy, a tool that allows you to decide how the Captain, the playable character from the first Frostpunk, led the city. While you can't transfer over any previous save data, this is a kind of nice way to get a running start. Creating districts and harvesting food, the increased scale of Frostpunk 2 is immediately noticeable. No longer are you dealing with your population on the individual level or making single structures, but working with hundreds of people at a time and creating districts. Knowing that I wasn't just dealing with single people, but hundreds of people at a time for harvesting food or collecting oil, it actually made the situation feel a little bit less tense. It somewhat dehumanized them. Decision making immediately presented itself in your need to obtain 40,000 units of food within a set time limit, or you're not even able to make it through the tutorial. I heard from others who were playing that they had trouble meeting that limit and had to repeat the tutorial. Luckily, I had a chance for the elders of my town to offer to just leave and dropped my food requirement to 25,000. With a heavy weight on my consciousness and a lot of extra food, I was able to progress. In the main campaign of Frostpunk 2, you play as the steward. After the death of the captain, the fate of New England is now on your shoulders. You begin with a sizable city, but are immediately informed that coal is running out and it's a race to establish more resources. Playing Frostpunk 2, you'll be balancing a lot of the same resources that were important in the original. Do you have shelter to house your population, food to feed them, and fuel to keep them warm? And then do you have a large enough population to continue to produce all of those at that level? Frostpunk 2 did an amazing job of always making me feel like I was so close to balancing my resources, but just not quite there. On my first playthrough of the first chapter, I was woefully unprepared. Every time I felt I'd have one resource managed, I'd realized I was running out of food elsewhere, or that colder weather was on the way and I just didn't have the coal to keep people warm. After struggling and failing to complete the first chapter, I restarted. Knowing where the best resources were and what the later goal was, I started moving towards them immediately, and I still had an incredibly difficult time. Social events and making laws is a very different experience in Frostpunk 2. As factions have ideas, you end up having to vote for bills. Taking place in the city council, you can put forward a law that you're a fan of, but you may not have the public perception on your side. This creates a new layer of politics on top of what is already a challenging situation. You can appease one side for votes by telling them that you'll pass different laws they're interested in or promise that you'll fund one of their projects. Frostpunk 2 does an excellent job of helping you keep track of all of these promises too. Every subsequent time you bring up that faction's information or go to vote on a new law, you'll see an icon indicating what you've said you'll assist with. These kinds of decisions start to steadily become more and more complicated as different factions begin to arise from within your city. While I hadn't managed to make enemies out of the factions that my city began with, a new one appeared that seemed to run opposite to the one that I'd previously been siding with. By the time that I'd reached my third attempt at Chapter 1, I understood where everything was, what I needed to keep an eye on, and where all of the icons scattered across my screen were. It's still a lot though. Frostpunk 2 is not the kind of game to hold your hand, as evident by a tutorial that you can very easily fail if you weren't giving it your all. I personally found this trial by fire approach to teaching a player the ropes a bit daunting. A new player coming into this experience is going to fail. There's no real way around that, but it's the players that will persist that will get the most satisfaction out of this game. Knowing which laws to pass early, what resources will be best to come by in larger quantity, and above all, knowing which objectives will be coming next were the only ways I was able to reach the end of the demo period and Chapter 2. Where I left the demo was just after establishing a new settlement, obtaining some oil and sending it back. Not only will players need to balance resources and keep a stable population, but you'll now be setting up new settlements all over this winter hellscape and balancing resources between them. For a new player, this is definitely a daunting idea, but for those who just wanted more Frostpunk, you'll have a fun time. I honestly wasn't sure how I would feel about Frostpunk 2 after spending some time with Frostpunk and being discouraged by it. Being in a situation where I was forced to sit down and play for multiple hours, retry, and even see how some of my peers were handling different situations, it really helped me with some of the major breakthroughs. issues. Is it the kind of game I normally find myself enjoying? Not really. But completing the first chapter with the city in a positive state, there being plenty of new fuel found, and a happy population, I felt an incredible amount of pride in my ability. If you're a fan of the original Frostpunk, I'm sure that Frostpunk 2 will definitely keep you interested. But if you've already attempted the original a couple times and it never really clicked with you, then chances are you won't get too much more out of this.